Good morning, good afternoon, good evening from wherever you're joining us. It's great to have you here. In the next 15 minutes, I will try to be brief. I'm going to give you an overview over the various ways how you can interact between Python and InterSystems Iris with a focus on embedded Python. Taking a look at the pros and cons of each of these different approaches and what you can do to tailor the experience to your desires, what you need for your specific projects. So we're going to take a look at, first of all, the comparison of what Python and ObjectScript have alike and where they're different, taking a closer look at embedded Python specifically, and then how we can optimize the experience for Python. Taking a look at a very simple introductory comparison, I don't think this is probably not too controversial, but both are untyped scripting languages. Both are object-oriented, or you can use object-oriented aspects in the language. They're both interpreted at runtime, and, well, I put it in quotes, it depends on your skill set, obviously, but both have very reasonable and simple integration layers into C and C++, which is one of the various reasons why we can build a very good and efficient bridge between those two languages. That by itself seems like those languages are a really nice match, and it should be really simple to work from one language to the other, but there are also differences, starting just with style, right? So if you're a Python developer or if you're new to Python, then you might not have heard of PEP 8, which describes exactly how you're supposed to work with code, how you have to style your code, the best practices. This includes naming conventions for how you name variables or class names, how you intend your code, how you're using tabs and spaces, the lines, and when you break them, all these kinds of things are very well written and defined in the Python community and usually are being applied by the Python community. So if you're starting to write Python code and you're new into the community, then it definitely makes sense to take a look at PEP 8 and read through it so that you're writing code that everybody else can consume. The most important statement that I really like about this description is that this insight that code is much more often read than it's actually written. So bear that in mind. If you're new to that community, I think that's always a good starting point. What's also interesting is the concept of modules. In many other object-oriented languages, you have a concept of something like classes and packages. In Python, you have three concepts: classes, modules, and packages. And that can be confusing if you're new to that world. Obviously, if you're an experienced Python developer, then this should be very straightforward. It can lead to really weird scenarios. So a module is basically a file with the extension py. So in this case, my class is the name of the module. And if in that file you implement a class called my class as well, and you want to work with this, then you have to write some really weird code in order to access your methods inside this class. So that's something to bear in mind and be aware of. That's typically one of the things that's a breaking point for ObjectScript based developers. Another concept that's relatively interesting, but is not unique to Python, is what's so-called dunders. These are special methods in Python that are usually provided as built-in system methods and are used for overloading as well. They're called dunders since they start and end with double underscores, and they're quite important. So in ObjectScript, these are like percentage methods, if you will. We will revisit dunders a couple of times during the session because they're indeed very important for some of the advanced techniques that you need in order to interact between those two environments. InterSystems, Iris, and Python, there are a couple of ways how you can make those two work together. First of all, we have embedded Python, as you can see here. There are like three main ways how you can interact with embedded Python itself as a concept, and we're going to take a look at all three of those. Usually the concept here is that the data and the logic is relatively close and work well together. The Python SDKs, those are the client libraries that we provide. Currently, the native API, there's a DB API for interacting with SQL and relational access. There's also a community edition of the DB API driver. And we are working on a new version of the InterSystems provided DB API driver, which is much more capable and better performing. There's also the concept of ELS, the external language servers, which allow you to call out from Iris to Python through a gateway. That's a way that allows you to connect in a bidirectional way. Those three approaches on the right side, the Python SDKs, allow you to run your code remotely through TCP/IP. So you see the logic and the data can be in a distributed environment, which is powerful, but obviously takes some time for going through the TCP stack. But you can also choose to use what's called the shared memory approach. So if your code is sitting on the same machine as your Iris instance, they can communicate very effectively through a shared memory section, and that's a very effective approach. If your data and your logic can run on the same system. Diving a bit into more detail, the first approach how you can use embedded Python is by implementing a standard object script class, build a method, and set the language to Python. Everything that you do inside this method is basically Python style. That's one way of doing it. The second is importing a Python module from the object script environment using the %sys.python import method. And the third is using the Iris Python interpreter. We're going to take a look at all three of those and what they mean. Looking at those different approaches, they have a various experience in terms of how Pythonic your experience is and what the target audience is. So taking a look at those in the next following slides. Starting off with the way of using Python methods inside an object script class. Very simple. You use the language tag and set the language to Python, and everything that's inside the curly braces then is going to be Python as a language. You can use the import statements to import the modules that you care about, and then work with Python as a standard environment for you. You can call this method from an object script method or from a Python method. That's very transparent to you as a developer. So a great way as an entry point. The good things about this, it's really simple to use. It's great if you just want to quickly prove that an interaction with Python works, and for example, making use of a specific library. And it's relatively convenient. It's also what's being used under the covers in some of the new technologies that we offer, like in BPL, the business processes. We support Python now directly instead of object script. That's new in 2024.1. And we're doing the same thing for DTL, the data transformations, which is coming up next, probably in 24.2. So it's something that's very transparent. The challenge hereby is that you're mixing two languages in a single environment. So you end up having a class which is written in object script and in Python. And that can be difficult for maintainability and also for mixed skill sets. If you have a developer who only knows one of those languages, it's really hard for that person to walk through that code and understand what's going on. Taking a look at the import method in %sys.python, this allows you to write an object script method and import a Python module and work with it as it would be an object script, a part of the object script library. So as you can see here, we're using the import method to import the module requests and then work with it as it would be an object script object. We can do this multiple times in this during this call, as you can see in the sample code, as we're also importing the built-ins module, and we can also use methods like the dunders that are a bit harder to grasp since they're using underscores. Just use the quotes, and that gives you a pretty extensive way of interacting with a library from an object script perspective. What's good about this is you're using only one language, you're not mixing languages. It's relatively easy to debug since you're staying in the same environment, but it definitely does require lots of in-depth knowledge on both languages. So there are a couple of challenges, like how do you interact, let's say, with global variables, or how do you call routines? Those may require weppers on the object script side, or if, let's say, a Python method returns multiple returns values, then you won't get that as like 3 individual return values back, but you will get 1 return value back. And then you need to use the dunders, in this case, get item, to retrieve the individual return values from that triple. So that just requires a lot of understanding how those two languages work together, and that can be challenging. Making use of the Iris Python interpreter is the third way how you can interact with Python. And it allows you to execute a Python script that you have on file. You can use import Iris as a statement to get access to InterSystems Iris libraries. And here's a very simple example how you can do this. At the top section of this code, we're calculating the Fibonacci series in Python, then using import Iris to get access to Iris classes and the corresponding methods. And if we execute this using Iris Python, you can see we're just pointing it to the file, and that's going to execute that script and output the values of whatever is happening, whatever we're writing out. This is a relatively native experience for Python developers since they're used to working in Python files. It definitely is a good separation of concerns. You have a very simple contract, and you have all of the flexibility in how you want to connect from your Python script to Iris. You can make use of import Iris, but you can also make use of the Python SDKs and, for example, run a DB API query. So that's very powerful. What's a downside of this approach that it requires you to manage external script files, and those typically are not part of your InterSystems Iris deployment, so that's something you have to keep in mind. So everything you've seen so far is mostly tended towards making Python available within Iris. So the Python developer needs to understand how Iris works. As we're expanding the usage of embedded Python, we're working towards a Python first approach. So we're trying to get Python concepts and make them available within Iris. WSGI is one of those that's defined in PEP 3333, and is a very popular enhancement for how you interact with web applications and also REST applications. That's introduced as a native feature in 24.1 with the experimental flag, and is compatible with any WSGI compliant frameworks. The way how this works is you really just configure a web application, as you do today as well for REST applications. But instead of setting it as a REST application and then making it available to a Python script, you just choose WSGI, and that automatically can get configured to call out to your Python application and the framework, such that you can interact with the Python REST environment, for example, without setting up too much code or tinkering with percentage REST classes that we have in Iris. So it's a very Pythonic experience, at least as a starting point. There are very popular community projects like interoperability in Python, developed by Guillaume, and is very compatible with existing object script productions, but lets you also build new components and messages directly in Python. And that's a very native way for a Python developer to interact with the interoperability aspects of our product. As I mentioned before, we are also working on providing Python support directly within BPL and DTL. So that's the other way around. If you're a skilled object script developer and would like to expand the usage of Python within your existing base, then using embedded Python in BPL and DTL is another good option for this. Revisiting this, depending on where you're coming from, what your skill set is in Python, you can either start with a very object script focused integration, which is probably more like using the language tag Python in object script, or you're trying to use the import function to interact with more complicated and powerful modules. If you're more a Python focused developer, or you have Python developers that want to interact with Iris and your application that you've built, then it's probably a better idea to take one of those approaches that are more Python centric. So that's a very quick and brief overview and rundown of what we have. So I'll keep it at that, since we only have 15 minutes. And I'm opening the floor for any questions you might have.
Thank you so much, Stefan. Such a great presentation. Everyone, please feel free to unmute or type your questions in the chat.
Can you talk about the challenges around embedded Python and debugging in Visual Studio Code? I haven't solved that problem yet, and I wonder if there's any intricacies to that you can explain or give some hints on during this call.
That's probably, to be fair, that's a topic that can be mind-boggling sometimes, and I like to revisit that at some point, since I'm also just getting started on diving into the topic of debugging. So I would be happy to follow up with you in 1 or 2 weeks. I'm sure I will be able to give you a better answer then, if that's fair for you.
Oh yeah, that's great. It'd be probably great for another topic on the roundtable as well. Or yeah, I'll look forward to anything you can share in the coming week.
Yeah, maybe absolutely. Even a posting on the developer community on that along those lines would be helpful.
Okay, is there, yeah, if there's anything in specific you're struggling with, based on, just let me know, right? What kind of approach are you using? Are you using the import function? Are you using the language tag? Let me know, just write it in the chat here, and we're happy to take a look at it and provide more info on a post or on the community roundtables.
Great, thank you.
Sure. Sounds like we're all set. If that's the case, then thank you very much. I'm always happy for more detailed questions. Feel free to reach out to me through the various channels, either through these roundtables here, just shoot me an email, find me on LinkedIn. And we're always happy to take a look at your requests and see what we can do to improve the experience. So thanks for all your feedback and listening in, and have a good day.
Thank you